Suffering from cancer, but showing true skills when traveling to Meimang. What? Surprisingly, it's the Marvel zombie universe. Watching the group of zombie heroes rising up in front of him, their tongues dancing wildly as they tried to devour him alive, Bai Ye smiled and stepped back to close the door of the passage, saying, "I won't disturb you, I'm leaving now." Keywords of the novel. Journey of comics starting from the zombie universe with no pop-ups, Journey of comics starting from the zombie universe. Download the complete set of TXT, and read the latest chapters of Journey of comics starting from the zombie universe. Chapter 1. Your system experience card has expired. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Your system experience card has expired. Unfortunately, Mr. Bai, our examination results show that you have advanced lung cancer. If you want, our hospital can immediately provide you with chemotherapy. However, from my personal perspective, I still recommend palliative treatment. How effective is chemotherapy now? Bai Ye looked up at the doctor in front of him. If we estimate optimistically, we can fight for a few more months for you. I'll think about it. I need to think about it. When he left the hospital, his face was unusually haggard and his lips were dry. A few strands of hair scattered out, leaving some messy strands on his pale forehead. The passers-by at the entrance of the hospital were like a tide rising and falling, as if they were far away in the sky, yet close in front of them, gradually moving away from him. Bai Ye felt as if she was in another world, lonely and desperate. Bai Ye returned home in a daze, exhausted and lying on the sofa. In the reflection of the TV screen, his cheeks are sunken and his eye sockets are deep, as if every breath requires all his strength. Having just graduated and worked for less than 2 years, he finally put in all his efforts to establish a foothold in the big city. Although he occasionally felt unwell, he was ignored for promotion and salary increase. It wasn't until a few days ago that he coughed up sputum with blood streaks and felt intense pain in his chest that Bai Ye rushed to the hospital for examination, but it was already too late. He lifted his arm and looked at his hands, his heart empty like a blank sheet of paper. The verdict of cancer deprived him of hope for life and expectations for the future. He only wanted to slowly disappear in this trance and despair. This is better than spending a lot of money lying in a hospital bed and living an extra 2 months with a tube inserted. Do you want to understand the meaning of life? Do you want to truly live? Who's talking? The White Knight, which had collapsed into a puddle, suddenly bounced up from the sofa and nervously looked around. Suddenly, a floating, crystal-clear white light curtain appeared in front of him at some point. Above the light curtain, there was a line of slightly darker regular script characters swaying slightly, which was exactly what he had just heard. Is it an illusion? This idea was quickly dispelled by Bai Ye. He reached out his hand to touch the line of text, but unexpectedly walked through it. He then circled around the light curtain a few times and found that no matter which direction he went, the light curtain was facing him, not far or near. At this moment, 2 symmetrical small characters appeared at the bottom of the line, with slightly dim edges, giving a realistic button texture. Yes, yes, do you want to truly live? Yes and no, is there anyone who hasn't seen Infinite Terror yet? Bai Ye sighed and slapped himself on the forehead, then slid down to cover his eyes. I just found out that I have cancer, and the system came back. Will there be a feeling of being approved? Speaking of which, isn't the one who uses this kind of rhetoric to attract people the main god? The treatment of going to the main god space is not as satisfying as the urban cultural system. Dancing on high-pressure lines every day can easily become a bottom-tier cannon fodder. If you click yes, then you must have boarded this pirate ship and will never escape in the future. But if you click no, will there be another system to find him? This thing in front of me can be said to be the last straw to save the dying White Knight. I really want to. Wait, why is there only yes and no? He put down his hand, blinked and realized that something seemed to be wrong. Ding, the host did not make a timely selection, and the system has randomly selected it. Then, still in a daze, Bai Ye saw the two options quickly fade away, as if afraid that he would press them down. Before completely disappearing into the light curtain, Bai Ye seemed to see the right one gradually turning into no. Starting to extract and travel through the world. Extraction completed, target world. Marvel Universe. 2149. Bai Ye touched his chin. He usually enjoys reading various comic books, but when the system suddenly mentioned the specific universe number, he couldn't remember which universe had the number 2149. So he opened his phone, and after more than 10 seconds, he got the answer. This cannot. Bai Ye smiled and rubbed her hands, looking at the white light curtain in front of her. Suddenly, she felt a little confused and began to slowly move back. The Marvel Zombie universe is not a good place to go, and The Diary of a Madman belongs to the realm of realism novels. The host did not make a choice in a timely manner, and the system has confirmed by default. Wait. A white light flashed by, and the figure of Bai Ye, who was picking up something from the table, twisted and disappeared into the living room. The phone, with its screen still on, floated in mid-air for half a second before crashing onto the tiled floor with a loud bang. A pink lightning bolt suddenly flashed across the sky of New York City, with a narrow shape and curved lines, like a python stretching out in the dark clouds. After a few breaths, there were several loud sounds in the sky, and rainstorm poured down. Ah 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 ah. A figure fell from mid-air and slammed fiercely into a huge trash can. He crawled out with both hands and feet. Cough, cough, cough. Pooh, cough, cough. Hush at my waist. Bai Ye stood next to the trash can, patting his body. Fortunately, all the plastic packaging bags thrown in this trash can alleviated the impact while not having any odor. Novice reward distribution in progress. Non-Desert Eagle pistol with limited bullets. With a clatter, a Glock 20 pistol fell in front of Bai Ye, accompanied by a small yellow bullet. After picking up the pistol, a blissful feeling rushed straight to the heavenly cover of the night. Within a few seconds, he mastered the usage of the pistol proficiently, covering everything from dismantling to shooting. My body is not as weak as before, and I have a feeling of being full of energy. Your system experience card has expired. The host did not provide a timely review, and the system has defaulted to a positive review. Then the light curtain suddenly disappeared, not slowly fading away as seen before, but directly disappearing. Before he could taste anything from the surprise of the disappearance of the system in front of him, a violent roar suddenly came from the sky that shook him all over, and then he looked up. That was a large and terrifying black fighter jet hovering at a height of several tens of meters, its wings pressed down like bird wings gliding in the air, its streamlined body trembled slightly, and the rear hatch opened wide, clearly waiting for someone. Luke, hurry up. The police on the other side of Times Square are calling again to urge us. The situation seems to have changed, we need to hurry over. A man was shouting on the plane. Bai Ye squinted his eyes and could only barely see that there seemed to be someone standing at the hatch waving downwards. Here we go. A few seconds later, a strong black man wearing a yellow jacket jumped up from the roof of a nearby apartment building. He saw nothing at a height of several tens of meters and easily jumped into the fighter jet. As soon as the cabin door closed, two blue tail flames spewed out from the tail of the fighter jet, quickly disappearing into the dark clouds. If I'm not mistaken, the person who jumped onto the plane just now should be Shunli Xia, Luke Cage, if they're going to Times Square. It's quite a coincidence that this time has arrived. Bai Ye bared his teeth and lightly tapped his skull with the stock of his gun. Yes, today is the beginning of everything that happened in the 2149 universe. Today is the day when superheroes in this world are infected with zombies. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Quick. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Quick. What is your memory of those zombies in movies and TV shows? A walking corpse sways and moves like a decaying corpse of an 80-year-old man. Or is it the athlete zombie who can climb a 100-meter-high wall for a mouthful of delicious fresh meat in the zombie world war? Imagine a zombie wearing a tight-fitting suit standing in front of you now, its thin, decaying skin capable of withstanding Hellfire missile attacks, and its yellowed and twisted knuckles crushing a steel plate is no more difficult than crushing a tofu. And when it puts its palm on your shoulder, you can still hear its foul-smelling big mouth whispering, "Just let me take a bite." Like the zombies of the first two, a slightly more formal modern army can completely solve the problem, perhaps with some casualties, but overall it will be within an acceptable range, and flesh and blood are ultimately not opponents of long guns and short guns. As long as there are enough guns and ammunition, the monsters in most movies and TV plays are never rivals to human beings. White Knight has seen people roast about this on the internet. He could never imagine how a group of stumbling zombies could use their rotten teeth to push human civilization to the brink of extinction. In theory, they were likely to be killed and turned into rare animals within a few years or even months. But what if it were a group of superpower zombies that could penetrate the heavens and earth without weapons? That result may be very different. After walking out of the alley and onto the street, the rainstorm just underway has stopped and half the sun has emerged from the dark clouds. Suddenly, Bai Ye's eyes narrowed and something flickered on the left, hitting his eyes. He shook his head and looked over. That is a poster of Steve Rogers, who made a classic Uncle Sam conscription move on the poster, pointing his right hand in a red glove at the person currently looking at the poster. However, at this point, most of the painting was covered by various strange graffiti, blurring out the content of the painting. Only a large red line was still clearly visible. The American colonel wants you to abide by the law. Below is a small line of phone numbers to contact the Avengers home. Yes, in this universe, Steve Rogers' rank is not captain, but a full 3 levels higher than the main universe, and he is called Colonel America, not Captain America. Hey buddy, have you seen enough? If you've seen enough, just give way. These posters need to be replaced. With the sound, a strong smell of cheap second-hand smoke came from behind Bai Ye, causing him to frown. Turning around, a white young man with freckles on his face was casually looking at him with a cigarette hanger in his mouth, holding a large roll of posters that looked brand new and had been produced. "Did you print this poster and stick it here?" Bai Ye asked. "How could it be? The Avengers house paid us to put up posters here, but it's not my business what will happen after putting them up. Do you see the graffiti above? It was just pasted yesterday and it's like this today." The young man with a cigarette in his mouth shrugged his shoulders and looked indifferent. As he spoke, he quickly pasted a new poster and picked up the roll of poster before running towards the other side of the street. It seemed that his remaining tasks for today were still quite heavy. Looking at the back of the young man who was constantly striving for his life, Bai Ye was quite moved and wiped the corner of his eye, then reached out and tugged hard at the poster in front of him. "Hey! Why are you tearing up the poster I posted? If you want it, I can give you a copy. Don't tear it." Bai Ye walked towards the street corner without looking back, tearing apart the poster in his hand until he only had a palm-sized note with the number to contact the Avengers home. The young man had only been chasing for 2 steps when he lowered his head and spat, cursing ominously in a low voice, because he saw the pistol pinned under the swaying corner of his clothes in the White Knight. Angered, he glared at Bai Ye's back and watched him disappear on the street corner. The white young man sighed helplessly as he looked at the debris on the ground. There were many strange people and things in New York, and there were all kinds of flying objects that had grown bigger. However, there was still someone inexplicably running with a gun to tear up posters. He eventually picked up a new poster and put it back on, deciding not to think about it anymore. From their words, it can be inferred that the Kun-style fighter jet just now should be the one in the original plot where a large group of Avengers sat on their way to Times Square. It won't take long to drive from here to Times Square, not to mention taking a plane. It's probably too late to stop them. What should we do? The White Knight that bypassed the street corner did not continue to walk forward, but leaned against the wall and stared at a newsstand across the street. The newsstand owner was making a phone call while holding a pen to write and draw on the newspaper. Silently recalling the plot from the original manga, Bai Ye's fingers kept caressing the pistol pinned to his waist. Earth.2149 is a comic universe with a very advanced timeline. The Avengers alliance in this universe has only been formed for a few years and has not experienced many major events. The place where they worked was even in Stark's old mansion, now known as the Avengers house, which was abandoned and replaced by the Avengers building many years later when the Avengers disbanded. Simply put, the Avengers in the 2149 universe received a message one day to deal with a falling incident that occurred in Times Square. Unexpectedly, they were all infected by sentinels who had already transformed into zombies, turning into intelligent zombies that devoured human flesh and blood. They spread the virus, and then the whole world inevitably slipped into the stomachs of zombie heroes within a few weeks. It is worth mentioning that the zombie virus in Marvel Zombies only infects superhumans to retain intelligence, but this boundary is actually very vague. Those who claim to be mortal gold and those who are infected with punishers can also retain intelligence. Getting cancer is a death, being bitten to death by zombies is also a death, but compared to the latter, the former appears much more affectionate. Originally, the level of technology in this world couldn't easily cure my cancer, at least it could be said that it was not very difficult, but people in this world are almost eaten by zombies and I still need to cure my hair. Thinking of this, Bai Ye reached out and smashed his hand against the wall, instantly startling the pedestrians around him to accelerate their steps and casting a gaze full of contempt, sympathy, and doubt, which he called caring for the mentally disabled. Hurry up. We need to come up with a way. We're running out of time. Quick. By the way, fast. He suddenly drew his gun and fired 2 shots into the sky. Amidst the screams of passers-by, he raised his gun and charged towards the newsstand across the street, with the hot muzzle pressing against the newsstand owner's forehead. I. Shut up, hang up the phone you're currently calling, and then, Bai Ye dribbled his eyes and thought for a moment. He grabbed the pen from the boss's hand, tore off half a page of newspaper, and quickly wrote on it. He slapped it onto the boss's shiny forehead, then wrote another note and threw it in front of him. This is the phone number of the Avengers home. I'll call you hands.free. According to the note, if you don't hit me within 10 seconds, I'll kill you. 19. This and this cannot be done. After reading the words on this note clearly, the old face of the newsstand owner was almost squeezed into a ball, staring at Bai Ye with tears in his eyes. Want to cry? Crying counts as time. May 4th. I'll fight. I'll fight. Feeling the gradually cooling barrel on his forehead, the boss's heart also cooled halfway and quickly pressed the button on the landline phone. Hello, this is Avengers Home. May I ask you? I'm looking for Petro Maximoff. Magneto asked me to give him a message related to Wanda. The voice on the other side of the phone immediately disappeared, as if someone had pressed the mute button. The boss immediately looked at Bai Ye with a pleasing gaze, afraid that he would shoot. 10 seconds later, just as the boss's heart had completely cooled down, the long-awaited heavenly sound finally rang from the other end of the phone. I'm Pietro. If you have anything, please speak up. The newsstand owner wiped the sweat off his forehead, took a deep breath, grabbed the microphone, and shouted, "Listen up, Wanda Maximoff is a watch for 10,000 people." End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Fast Silver. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Fast Silver. A pale blue silhouette shuttled through the streets and alleys of New York City, constantly bypassing the cars that were slow as snails in his eyes, as well as the almost stationary pedestrians. In his view, the scenery on both sides of the street quickly receded. About 3 seconds later, Pietro will arrive at his destination, but before that, there was enough time for him to recall the angry incident that had just happened, which was also the reason why he went there. Just 12 seconds ago, he received a phone call from someone claiming to be the messenger of his father, Magneto. There was some news about Wanda that he wanted to tell him. To be honest, he would probably think it was some guy with a pig's nose trying to make fun of it, but when he heard the second half, he brought Wanda along. Petro decided to use his rare patience to listen, and then he heard the most angry and vulgar language of his life. The person on the other end of the phone even arranged and combined various animals and reproductive organs with his sister Wanda to make sentences, doing everything in his power to insult his beloved loved ones. The dirty language used is unheard of and despicable language. How can his mother Durian be used for those things? Which pervert came up with this kind of gameplay? Pietro stopped sideways, his soles rubbing against the asphalt road with a chilling sound. After briefly identifying the direction, he immediately rushed into the street mentioned on the phone. Not bad, let's forget about that crazy person cursing with all his dirty words. He even dares to shout on the phone that he's cursing on this street. If Quicksilver dares to come, there will be good fruit to eat. Here it is. With just one glance, he saw the middle-aged bald man holding the phone receiver in his hand, and immediately planned to punch him to let the impolite thing know that he would have to keep the door open in the future. However, as he rushed closer, he suddenly stopped. Pietro squinted his eyes and took off the note stuck on the forehead of the newsstand owner, which seemed to have something written on it. Wanda is in danger. Do you remember that gypsy Natalia? In an instant, his pupils contracted slightly, and Natalia was the mother of him and his sister, the Scarlet Witch. She disappeared shortly after the birth of the siblings, and these secrets were not something that passers-by who wanted to make the Avengers happy could know. Is it possible that the unattractive bald man in front of me really has information about Magneto? At this thought, Pietro's face showed hesitation. The fist he was supposed to swing stopped in mid-air, but in the end, he let go and grabbed the newsstand owner's collar, shouting loudly. What's the danger with Wanda? I'll only give you one chance, say it. Hey! Seeing Quicksilver suddenly appear on his face accompanied by a gust of strong wind and grab onto his collar, the boss trembled with fear and almost fell to the ground, but the strong hand grabbed him. Hurry up, I don't have much patience. If you... Just as Pietro was sneering and trying to pressure the boss, a piercing pain suddenly came from his thigh. Before he could do anything with his superhuman reaction speed, a few gunshots and more leg pain pierced his consciousness. He instinctively released his hand and fell to the ground. Standing across the street, Bai Ye looked at the silver-haired man lying at the entrance of the newsstand, blood flowing from under him. After thinking for a moment, he raised his hand and fired a shot. Ow! Nodding satisfied, he walked towards the bewildered newsstand owner. Imagine, can a person with normal thinking accept that when drinking water, the speed of the water flow in the cup is as slow as a sticky strong glue, and it takes a few minutes to drink a glass of water? Or is there a delay as high as a few hundred ms when playing games? So, in order to have conversations with other people who are not as fast, or to interact with society, extremely fast people like Fast Silver will inevitably slow down their thinking speed to be similar to ordinary people. Otherwise, they would have to endure the boredom of being able to hear a single word for tens of seconds in their self-awareness, which no one can tolerate, and this is also their biggest flaw. You just killed an Avenger. Bai Ye, who had just put away his gun, rolled his eyes upon hearing these words and walked towards the newsstand. Stop yelling, Quine is not dead. Didn't you hear him still yelling? I just injured him. The newsstand owner leaned out half of his body and breathed a sigh as he lay groaning on the ground. He then nervously shouted to Quicksilver, "Oh my goodness, it's good you're not dead. He threatened me with my family. I swear, I really didn't mean to do this. He's busy in pain, it's hard to hear, and you should thank me. If I were you, I would sell all my assets now to buy enough water and food, and then find a basement to stay for decades, or more simply, find a way to commit suicide now, so as to experience what will happen next." What are you talking about? The newsstand owner looked at the serious white knight in front of him and suddenly felt a little scared. This guy can't be a follower of any cult or heresy, can he? The kind of belief that the end of the world is coming and that evil gods will destroy the world. He couldn't help but take a few more steps back, only to find himself leaning against the wall of the newsstand with a clang and unable to retreat. Bai Ye glanced strangely at the boss with a shiny mind and bent down to examine Qian's injuries. He just fired a total of 9 shots, 6 of which hit, all on the leg of this flying leg. However, based on the amount of bleeding, it seems that he didn't hit the artery, so this kid is lucky. Looking at the wounds on Petro's body again, some were penetrating wounds and some were penetrating wounds, which means there are still some residual shrapnel left in his muscles. However, the wound has started to slowly contract and stop bleeding, and the mutant's strong physical fitness is making him recover quickly. Tie me a newspaper rope and tape, then turn on the TV behind you and switch to the news channel. Bai Ye glanced up at the boss who was still in a daze and casually said. The snowflake screen flickered for a few seconds, and a female journalist wearing a beige trench coat appeared in the picture. She was standing on Times Square, and from behind her could only see a chaotic scene, with only the distant large screen advertisement still promoting the product as usual. The reporter's voice appeared somewhat tense. Ladies and gentlemen, I am at the scene in Times Square where a strange fall occurred. We can see a human-form creature falling in the center of the square. Currently, the police have set up a quarantine zone, and almost all police in New York City are evacuating civilians here, while the Avengers are on their way to deal with it. Turn up the voice a bit more so that I can hear it clearly. The boss touched his head and chuckled, reaching out to pinch the knob next to the TV and gently turning it. The reporter's voice rang out again, with some surprise. I can now clearly see that strange humanoid creature wearing a golden uniform, looking like some superhero or villain. At present, we cannot confirm the identity and origin of this creature. However, I believe the Avengers will be able to handle this incident as soon as possible to ensure the safety of the citizens. At this point, the photographer cooperated very well and moved the camera to focus on the distance. From the screen, it can be barely seen that there is a golden figure lying on the ground about a few tens of meters behind the female journalist, trembling slightly. Behind him, there is also a tattered blue cloak dancing in the wind. In this universe, the Sentry, who claims to have the power of millions of stars, is just an overused drug addict, and people's impression of the term Sentinel is still limited to Sentinel robots specifically designed to eliminate mutants. They had no idea what it meant for the already mentally unstable and extremely dangerous lunatic in front of them to become a zombie. Bai Ye bowed his head and kicked the guy who was tied into Zongzi by a pile of tape and string. He knew what it meant to be fast Silver, which had passed into a coma due to a large amount of blood loss. It was this fast-running kid who, after being infected by zombies, spread the virus to the whole world in just a few hours. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Telephone. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Telephone. The screen on the TV finally froze at the moment when the Kun fighter plane slowly landed. Just a few seconds later, there was a violent shaking of the camera, followed by screams and explosions. Immediately after, the signal disappeared, and the old TV set flickered with snowflakes again. You can leave now, call the police, go home, or do as I say, whatever you want. Hey. Thank you, sir. The owner of the newsstand, as if granted amnesty, ran out of the newsstand and quickly disappeared on the street corner. Perhaps he will be torn apart and stuffed into his mouth by those zombie heroes later, and perhaps he will be lucky enough to become one of those billions of survivors, but these are not the issues that White Knight needs to consider now. In the original plot, Steve, Captain Marvel, and the Black Widow have been infected with zombies and are feasting on the citizens they once protected. Fortunately, I came up with a way to trick Quicksilver into not getting infected on his way to support those Avengers. The speed of virus transmission in this way may be slightly slower than before, at least not enough to allow zombie heroes to destroy all humanity within a few days. And now, it's time to move on to the next step of planning. As Bai Ye scanned his surroundings, he noticed the glass window on the wall beside him. Without hesitation, he raised his arm and smashed the piece of glass with his elbow. Wow! The shattered glass made a sharp cracking sound, and fragments splattered everywhere. Bai Ye grabbed the larger piece and slowly leaned towards Fast Silver's eyes. Then he didn't move forward anymore, but turned his wrist, allowing the sunlight to pass through the broken glass and reflect a dazzling light. White Knight expressionlessly adjusted the glass repeatedly, ultimately condensing the afterglow emitted by the sunset into a fiery beam that hit Quicksilver's eyes. "Alright, wake up now. We need to have a chat." The silver-wide tape tightly wraps around Quaishan's hands and feet, as well as various joints of the body, while the rope cleverly crosses and wraps to form a mesh structure, tightly tied. A little bit of blood that was about to coagulate flowed out from the wound on the leg. Quain slowly woke up from his coma, and a dull pain from his legs washed through his entire body, making his consciousness gradually clear. He tried hard to open his eyes, and the refracted sunlight stimulated his pupils, causing him to squint and his brain to run rapidly. Who is it? Who just attacked him? I have only been a superhero for a few years since I debuted, and I usually follow American colonels and others to fight and clean up some miscellaneous soldiers. Unlike them, they all have corresponding villains. It can be said that almost no one has a motive to attack him. He tried to move his body, but found that his limbs were tightly bound, unable to move freely, and his mouth was sealed with tape, unable to make any sound. He only vaguely remembered a sharp pain, followed by a dimness. His thoughts were struggling to piece together fragmented memories, and a few seconds later he widened his eyes. He suddenly realized that he had just been shot by an ordinary person with a gun, and in an instant, anger surged into his heart. Woo-woo. Humph woo-woo. Looking at Quain, who was so anxious that he almost rolled on the ground, Bai Ye shrugged his shoulders and said, "I'm going to tear off the tape from your mouth now. You shouldn't bite me, right?" Immediately, the sharp glass shard aimed at Petro's trembling eyeballs, slowly advancing, and finally maintaining a distance of a few centimeters. Looking at Quain's eyes, a hint of shyness finally appeared. Bai Ye nodded in satisfaction and removed the tape with the other hand. "Do you know what the hell you just did? Give it to me immediately." "I know, I shot and injured an Avenger, preventing him from going to support the Avengers in battle, while also saving his life and preventing him from being infected as a zombie. Now, believe it or not, the Avengers who just boarded the Kuan-style fighter jet and headed to Times Square have all been destroyed, and they have all been transformed into the zombies in movies and TV dramas." Aha! Watching the endless and eloquent White Knight before him, Petro's mouth twitched wildly. The first thought that came to his mind was that this person might have a secondary illness, right? Zombies. Isn't that something from a virtual work? How could it possibly appear in reality? This person must have been playing games like this. In the blink of an eye, he realized that as the fastest man in the world, he had been ambushed by this little rascal and capsized in the sewer. It was truly embarrassing and he couldn't help but feel sorry for himself. "Hello, are you listening to me? It's you who's tied up, not me." Bai Ye suddenly noticed that Quain looked absent-minded and raised his hand to snap his fingers twice. "Listening, listening. You didn't kill me but instead tied me up. Who made you kidnap me? Hydra? The Mutant Brotherhood? Or Pioneer Technology?" After wriggling like a caterpillar for 2 times, Quain realized that he couldn't move and said helplessly. "Tell me, do you know Nick Fury's contact information? An emergency number or something like that?" "No, I'm not familiar with him. If you're a crazy little fan of the Divine Shield Bureau, you should go find the American Colonel. He's closest to that group of people." Bai Ye looked at Quain very seriously and said, "I just said, the American Colonel has now turned into a zombie. Come up with some unique ways to come out." "Fuck me. Upon hearing these words, Qian immediately closed her eyes in pain, and it was too uncomfortable to talk to someone who seemed to have delusions. Boom! Suddenly, a loud noise came from afar, followed by a shockwave that shook the entire street. With the sound of explosions, a thick smoke began to twist and spiral in the air, forming a black vortex. Objects on the streets were lifted one after another, and trash cans, trees, and vehicles on the roadside were all shaking wildly. Immediately after, the sound of the ambulance's siren whistled past, and Petro could see from the corner of his eye that the ambulance was heading towards Times Square. "Hurry up and untie me." "Wait a moment." Bai Ye stood up with a solemn expression and looked at the thick smoke rising into the sky. Qian, who was bound, opened his eyes wide in anger and shouted loudly to Bai Ye, "What are you waiting for? Release me quickly, there are civilians over there who need me to rescue. Do you know how many people have been killed if you don't let me go?" As he shouted, he twisted violently, but with his vigorous movements, blood flowed out of the wound, ultimately causing him to stop helplessly. Glancing at the camera flashing red dots on the street corner, Bai Ye replied, "When a smart person contacts me, he should also know the dangers of being infected with zombies." Christ, his mother is up. Quicksilver rolled his eyes. He didn't want to hear this crazy person talk anymore. After this was over, Steve would definitely laugh at him and be captured by a mentally abnormal person. My sister will definitely laugh at him, not to mention that annoying eagle eye. At this moment, the phones on the entire street rang almost at the same time, from the supermarket across the street to the newsstand in front of us. They formed a noisy interweaving sound, with various types of bells echoing on the open street. In Petro's shocked gaze, Bai Ye naturally grabbed the microphone and placed it next to his ear, as if facing an old friend he had never met before. "Hello. I'm Nick Fury, who are you?" End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Nick Fury. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Nick Fury. Hello, are you still there? It's quite polite, I cough 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 cough. Bai Ye tightly grasped the phone and was about to say something when suddenly he coughed violently. Cough cough. Pooh. He coughed in pain, with a strange smell of rust in his mouth, and each cough was accompanied by a strong discomfort. As he coughed harder, a few mouthfuls of bloody sputum were spit out from his mouth, with a dark red color. I've had enough of those red tape. To put it short, I believe you already know what happened in Times Square by now. I have all the intelligence you need, send a Kun fighter jet to pick me up to the aerospace carrier. The other end of the phone fell silent, as if surprised by Bai Ye's frankness, or as if considering the conditions he had proposed. Bai Ye gently wiped the bloodstains from the corners of his mouth, his gaze swept over Qian, who was glaring angrily and waiting for a response from the other end of the phone. Although he was still coughing up blood this time, unlike in the original world, his body did not feel any fatigue after being enhanced by the system that ran after touching. A moment later, a reply came from the other end of the phone. Sure, how is Petro's injury? Is it fatal? Bai Ye sighed and kicked the silver-haired man who had fallen to the ground with force. I'm afraid these injuries are not fatal. He should be able to hold on to the space carrier, he said. The phone fell silent again, but this time it was much shorter, and a few seconds later it made a sound. Perhaps you can take him. No, that's not within my plan. Halfway through his words, he was interrupted by the day and night. He knew what Fry was planning on, and it was better to make fast silver here than to keep carrying a time bomb. However, he still has some plans that he needs to rely on the cooperation of fast silver, so he cannot die for the time being. Persuade Petro for me not to oppose the decision I made on the way, and I will take him with me to fly the aircraft carrier. Sure, give him the phone. This time, it was somewhat unexpected, and Fry agreed to him without any hesitation. He picked up the quicksilver on the ground and handed the microphone to his ear. I'm looking for you. Qian's hand was tied and unable to answer the phone freely. He could only lift his shoulder and clamp the phone receiver firmly to keep it stable. There was a hint of anger on his face. "Fred. Is that you? Did you send this bumpy guy? What should he give me quickly?" The news from the other end of the phone shocked Quine. His eyes widened and his pupils slightly contracted. He felt a cold chill rising from the bottom of his heart, almost making it impossible for him to breathe. Colonel America, Hawkeye, Captain Marvel, Luke Cage, and others all sacrificed themselves. No, that's not accurate. They have turned into zombies like Bai Ye said, and from their performance, they still maintain a healthy level of intelligence. At this moment, they have spread out from Times Square to eat a lot. The explosion that would occur was a third-rate hero, Red Heart Jack, who attempted to self-destruct with an unknown creature before dying. But based on the later situation, he didn't even harm a single hair of that creature. Pietro's face gradually showed a sense of fear, his eyebrows slightly furrowed, and tiny beads of sweat oozed from his forehead. He began to realize that the situation before him might be more dangerous and complex than he had imagined. If the most powerful group of superheroes on Earth were all wiped out in just a few minutes, who could have solved this crisis? No, this is just another invasion by the Skurus or Chitauri. Soon, the Divine Shield will be able to stop the counterattack force. You should know that this damage is not all members of the Avengers, and besides, the magical 4 and X-Men are still there. He comforted himself like this in his heart, but the next second he was splashed with a bucket of cold water by Fry. After preliminary assessment, we have decided to abandon New York City and instead focus on gathering survivors. I need you to cooperate with the person around you as much as possible. The other end of the phone lowered its voice and said almost imperceptibly, "Keep an eye on him." Quicksilver took a deep breath, trying to calm her emotions. He knows he must let go of his personal fears and interests and make the right decisions to save the world. He nodded silently under the gaze of the White Knight, as if accepting the request from the other end of the phone. Despite some inner worries, he decided to believe in the correctness of this decision. After all, no matter what, he is a superhero, and in the face of righteousness, he will steadfastly move forward to save more lives. Click. Bai Ye raised his hand and hung up the phone, looking at Quine with a smile on his lips. It seems that we have reached a consensus. You probably don't hold grudges against me for giving you a few shots, do you? This matter is not over, take me away. The Kun-style fighter jets from the Divine Shield Bureau are almost all sent out to intercept those. Speaking of this, Pietro paused with a strange expression and then said, "Zombie hero, they just pulled out a plane to pick us up. The boarding location is a bit far from here, and it takes 20 minutes to walk there." Suddenly, a large crowd surged out from the street corner like a tide. These people have frightened eyes and expressions, as if being chased by something terrifying. They ran with all their might, ignoring the crowd behind them, as if escaping was their only goal. Bai Ye stopped in shock and stared closely at the large group of people. Their eyes flashed with confusion and concern, not understanding what had happened and why so many people had gathered and fled wildly in such a short period of time. "Run quickly. What are you still waiting for?" A kind-hearted person reminded Bai Ye, but soon he was also crowded and disappeared. As the crowd quickly fled, they flashed past the eyes of Bai Ye and Quine. There were men and women, old and young, and they were frantically pushing and shoving each other, trying their best to escape forward. Some people's clothes are messy and some are even covered in dust, indicating that they are escaping the danger area at the fastest speed. However, although those people were frantically fleeing, they still instinctively avoided Bai Ye and Quine, carefully bypassing them and trying to stay as far away as possible from this seemingly troublesome couple. In the distance, black smoke surged into the clouds, instantly staining the edges of the sky red. The thick black smoke spread like a strong wind, merging upwards into the dark clouds. This black smoke seems to have infinite power, forming a demonic mark in the air that envelopes the entire region. Accompanied by the black smoke were faint screams, like the roar of demons in nightmares. The screams, mixed with emotions of pain, fear, and despair, quickly spread and pierced everyone's hearts like sharp blades. You just said, where is what Fry said? Just in the direction where these people are coming. Bai Ye took a deep breath and picked up the fast silver on the ground. Time waits for no one, let's go. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Red Heart Jack. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Red Heart Jack. Around the street corner and walking several hundred meters, Bai Ye finally understood what the group of people had just been avoiding. The head of the huge Statue of Liberty is currently stuck in a Starbucks coffee shop, with the section of the head facing the two people. They can clearly see the tangled wires and metal components inside, revealing an incomplete and broken state. And the eyes on its head lost their original luster, one of which even shattered into fragments, as if silently recounting the pain experienced by the Statue of Liberty. The corners of the head's mouth were also severely damaged, twisted and deformed, like a twisted smile. From the impact marks, it can be seen that the Statue of Liberty experienced severe friction and collision when its head fell. The bronze surface showed burnt marks, appearing damaged and dull compared to its original smoothness. The Starbucks coffee shop was the one that withstood the impact, and the structure on the second floor had completely collapsed. The huge glass display window shattered into countless sharp small fragments, shining like a diamond in the cold sunlight. All of this happened too suddenly, and the interior of the coffee shop became chaotic. The tables and chairs were overturned, porcelain fragments scattered all over the ground, and the coffee machine hissed. The aroma of coffee still lingers in the air, mixed with the scent of dust and broken materials, creating a unique and chaotic taste. What happened here? Bai Ye looked around and kicked half of the broken sign on the ground. The part of the mermaid had already disappeared, with only a small half of the crown remaining. It should be Jack the Red Heart who did it. Just now, Fry told me that Jack sacrificed himself in the fight against the falling creature. Quicksilver, who was carried on his shoulder, said with a heavy face. He was not familiar with Red Heart Jack, but after witnessing the place where an Avenger died in battle, he couldn't help but feel dejected. Well, I think he did sacrifice, but not completely. Bai Ye's eyes turned and he noticed a familiar figure in the ruins that caught his attention. That's Red Jack. He used to be a machine and an indispensable member of the Avengers. However, at this moment, he had been blown up and only had his upper body left, buried under the ruins. However, as he was about to get closer, he immediately felt a chilling aura spreading. Red Jack has been infected as a zombie, and his eyes have lost their former brightness, replaced by madness. Ha meat. Ha cough. Bai Ye's eyebrows furrowed as he quickly retreated, maintaining a distance from the half-corpse. According to Qian's words, this guy may have been infected during a fight with the sentry and attempted to self-destruct, but unexpectedly survived, only losing half of his body. I'm so hungry. You. Let me take a bite. Red Jack's upper body struggled to break free from the ruins, and the shattered mechanical parts made a piercing friction sound on him. He let out a deep roar, full of wildness and thirst. He opened his mouth, revealing his sharp teeth, and rushed towards the White Knight. However, due to the broken upper body of Red Heart Jack, his actions became clumsy and unstable. Suddenly, he lost his balance and hit the ground with a dull impact sound. Despite this, Red Heart Jack still stubbornly crawled forward, disregarding his own physical injuries and pain. His mechanical parts made a creaking friction sound, and he grabbed the ground with his broken arm, trying to approach White Knight. Bai Ye steadily raised his gun and faced Red Heart Jack, who had been infected as a zombie, unwaveringly pulling his finger. With a slight pull of the trigger, a piercing gunshot instantly broke the silence. The bullet sped out, crossing the air and quickly flying towards Red Jack's head. Time seemed to pause for a moment, and then, amidst the gunfire, the bullet accurately hit Red Jack's head. A powerful force erupted in an instant, splattering brains and fragments. Red Jack's head instantly exploded, as if torn apart by an invisible force. Blood and broken bones splattered around, exuding a foul odor. The broken skull cracked open, revealing shattered brain tissue and exposed skull. Its ability cannot be freely controlled, and it needs equipment to suppress the explosion. At this moment, the bullet of Bai Ye happened to become a catalyst. At that moment, Red Jack's eyes were filled with pain and despair, but his body immediately lost its support and fell to the ground, unable to move anymore. The incomplete brain and blood spread on the ground, creating a chilling scene. Red Jack's body became even more twisted and terrifying, like a tormented humanoid nightmare. The body of Red Heart Jack has not completely ceased to be turbulent. There was still a small explosion occurring between his broken skull and skull. These explosions were not significant, but they were enough to make the body tremble everywhere. Suddenly, a series of faint explosions came from Red Heart Jack's chest. The broken ribs and decaying tissue burst out with a faint light, like sparks flickering in the darkness. Bai Ye took 2 more steps back, and these small explosions seemed to originate from the energy stored in Red Jack's body. Before his death, these energies were once the source of his superhero power, and now they still exist in his body after death. Each small explosion releases a faint wave of energy, causing the shattered body to tremble even more violently. Red Jack's limbs twisted and twitched uncontrollably under the impact of the explosion, as if he was still fighting for survival. Is this what it looks like after being infected with zombies? Petro was carried on his shoulder by Bai Ye, looking down at the body of Red Jack and the series of tiny explosions. He was filled with surprise and fear in his heart, his eyes wide open, gazing at this incredible sight. He felt the faint energy wave emanating from the corpse of Red Heart Jack, and the unsettling tremor spread throughout his body. What touched him the most deeply was the meaning represented by those small explosions. They are remnants of superhero power that still exist in the body after death, but why is it so shocking? A frightened expression appeared on Kuai-Yin's face, and she couldn't help but tremble. He widened his eyes and stared intently at Red Jack's twisted and twitching limbs, almost unable to believe his own eyes. He suddenly realized that he had faced similar dangers before and could become such a monster. This world is gradually drawing towards the abyss of destruction, even superheroes cannot escape. This world, as the person just said, is heading towards destruction. I remember you said before that you hit me just to prevent me from becoming a zombie. Yeah. I believe it now. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Avengers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Avengers. On the abandoned city streets, the wreckage of a Kuan fighter jet fell next to a dilapidated building. The appearance of the fighter jet is almost unrecognizable, with torn and deformed metal fragments scattered all over the ground. Black smoke still rose from the wreckage, filled with a strong burnt smell. Surrounding the wreckage were scattered piles of corpses on the ground, which were completely destroyed by the impact of the plane crash. Their bodies were twisted and deformed, and their limbs were scattered in a mess. The smell of decay permeates the air, creating a chilling scene along with the wreckage. There seems to have been an earth-shattering battle here in this apocalyptic scene. The infected zombie in the United States is biting a piece of meat with a big mouth, his face stained red with blood, and he is content to chew on it while saying to Hawkeye, "It's amazing, Barton. There's as much delicious meat in this city as you want." He opened his mouth, revealing sharp teeth, and bloody flesh residue remained at the corner of his mouth. There is a wicked wound on Eagle Eye's shoulder, from which blood gushes. The skin around the wound was shattered, forming a blood and flesh blurred area. Blood flowed along the lines of the wound, dyeing his purple clothes deep red. The edge of the wound is slightly swollen, emitting a faint pain. Eagle Eye's breathing was rapid and heavy, and he could feel the spread of that vicious infectious force. He knew that being bitten by an American colonel had already predetermined his fate. Eagle Eye writhed his body in pain, his consciousness dominated by hunger, but he still retained his last shred of will, refusing to succumb to the temptation of demons. He answered in a trembling voice, "No. It shouldn't be like this. I won't be your kind, Colonel. Tony and the SHID will eventually find a way to treat us." The American colonel let out a hoarse laugh, his eyes filled with mockery. He raised the flesh and blood in his hand, bit it into pieces, and blood splattered everywhere. He swallowed while roaring, "You're just wasting time, Eagle Eye. You can't escape, we'll enjoy this wonderful gospel together." This smile is no longer the heroic smile of the past, but full of madness and cruelty. His eyes gleamed with ecstasy, as if enjoying the deliciousness of flesh and blood. He chewed on the meat, twitching at the corners of his mouth, making people feel his endless hunger and thirst. Eagle's eyes clenched their lips, trying to shift their attention elsewhere. His body trembled, and hunger pierced his heart like a sharp blade. He doesn't want to be defeated by the temptation of an American colonel, he needs to remain sober and protect his humanity. However, the passage of time made it increasingly difficult for Hawkeye to resist. The burning sensation in his abdomen became increasingly intense, and the slight gurgling sound coming from his stomach made him restless and restless. Every second, his will is constantly being eroded by hunger. Hawkeye's hands began to tremble as he struggled to recall his family, friends, and those who had fought alongside him. Their smiles and warm memories are like a barrier protecting him, trying to resist the invasion of inner darkness. Pop, a torn piece of meat was thrown in front of him. "Come, Clint, don't torture yourself anymore, just take a bite." That piece of meat emitted a tempting smoke, and its texture looked tender and juicy. Eagle Eyes couldn't resist the tempting taste. He tried to suppress the drool and hunger in his mouth, but as the aroma seeped into his nose, his will began to crumble. In the end, Hawkeye could no longer resist the urge to starve. His eyes were blurred and his breathing was rapid. He gritted his teeth and took the piece of meat, putting it into his mouth. "Take a bite of it, Mobius of the Roaring Assault Team. That mysterious vampire doesn't still suck blood, but is he still an anti-hero? He is the dream lover of many Gothic girls. Perhaps I could do the same." Clint Barton comforted himself in his heart and bit down. A bloody smell permeated inside his mouth, but Eagle Eye felt an inexplicable sense of relief, as if his body was regaining strength and returning to the days when he was still in the circus. The burden on his body disappeared, and reality became so relaxed. Although there seemed to be a desperate cry of protest in the depths of his heart, Hawkeye found it increasingly difficult to control. The strong and tempting aroma of the meat pieces plunged him deeply into it. He tried to stop chewing, trying to resist the temptation, but every swallow made him increasingly lost in this maliciously delicious food. "This is actually quite good," it thought. Its gaze became fanatical, fascinated by every taste of that piece of meat. It realized that it could no longer escape this dark force, and it succumbed to this evil taste, filling its soul with it. It said vaguely, "This. How could this be? So delicious, Steve, I can't resist it." The zombie wearing the star-spangled banner slowly wiped away the remaining blood from his mouth, his eyes empty and lifeless, but his face twisted into a ferocious smile. He stood up, picked up his shield in his hand, shining with incomplete light. "Ha ha ha." He laughed wildly. "What did I say? No one can refuse this kind of gospel." Eagle Eye did not respond to him, but continued to squat on the ground and eat heavily. "Let's go," he commanded in a hoarse and deep voice, his body swaying and stumbling. "Let's go back to the Avengers' home, we have a responsibility to spread this hunger gospel to every corner of this world." Eagle Eye, infected as a zombie, struggled to stand up and followed the American colonel forward. His eyes were empty and heartless, and his face lost its former perseverance and determination. Suddenly, Eagle Eye turned around and his gaze fell on a tattered beige windbreaker. It hung on the shattered windshield of the Kun fighter jet, swaying silently in the wind. The color of the windbreaker is still bright, but the fabric is already covered with cracks and dirt. Its cuffs are tattered and there are still some blood stains on the collar. Eagle-Eye gazed at the windbreaker, and for a second, his heart was filled with pain and guilt. He tried hard to recall the past, recalling the honors and responsibilities of the past, but those memories seemed blurry and distant in his mind, as if they never existed. He gave up this meaningless resistance and stumbled along with the American colonel, walking further and further. A sharp gust of wind blew the tattered beige coat off the shattered windshield of the Kun fighter jet. The windbreaker fluttered in the air, as if it had its own destiny. But it ultimately succumbed to gravity and landed in a pool of bright red blood on the ground. The fabric absorbed the bloodstains and gradually became a deep red color, appearing even more dilapidated and desolate. The windbreaker trembled slightly in the bloodstains, as if telling of the pain and sadness it had experienced. It remained silent in that pool of blood, silently enduring everything. The sound of the wind around gradually subsided, leaving only the faint tremble of the windbreaker in the pool of blood. It seems to silently express its silent accusations against this world, witnessing the tragedy of deviation and betrayal. However, no matter how the windbreaker trembles, it cannot change the reality in front of us. It can only lie quietly in that pool of blood, becoming a part of this apocalyptic world. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Divine Shield Bureau. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Is Chapter 9 about her? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Is Chapter 9 about her? I plan to give up New York, and even the whole world. These words shocked the two present, and Coulson exclaimed in disbelief, "What are you saying?" Fry lifted his head and fixed his gaze on Coulson. His expression revealed a sense of heaviness and determination, but also a sense of helplessness and pain. He took a deep breath and continued to explain, "Coulson, I know this sounds difficult to accept, but the speed of spread of this virus is just too fast. And infected individuals can still think and act like they did during their lifetime. In just 10 minutes, we lost the American colonel and Hawkeye." Coulson looked at Fry in shock, his eyes flickering with disappointment. He once regarded Fry as his mentor and leader, and he never imagined that Fry would make such a decision. "But, Fry, we can't just give up like this. We are the Divine Shield Bureau, and we have a responsibility to protect humanity and the world." His voice carried a hint of unwillingness. Fray's gaze turned to Coulson, who understood his emotions, but his determination remained unshakable. According to the initial data model simulation, this virus will completely infect New York within a few hours and is expected to spread worldwide within a day. As he spoke, Fry waved his hand and a holographic image rose. Quicksilver, who had been infected with zombies, was running hard. The scene under his feet kept changing, one was the ocean, and the other was the mountains. However, someone, for unknown purposes, helped us by temporarily slowing down the virus's infection rate by injuring Quine. The image became blurry and turned into a white knight carrying a fast bank, surrounded by the ruins of New York City. As for the antidote, our scientists told me they were powerless. This virus is extremely aggressive, and they conducted experiments using tissue samples from Wolverine preserved in the laboratory. Even Logan couldn't resist this infection. Even his proud self-healing factor will accelerate this process. The image twisted again and turned into a Canadian man who looked irritable. Coulson silently listened to Fry's explanation, feeling a deep despair and confusion enveloping his heart. His body seemed to have lost its strength and he sat down on a nearby chair, weakly leaning against the back. I weakly lifted my hand and rubbed my forehead. The inner struggle and confusion left a heavy mark on him, and he had no idea what to do next. Coulson scratched his head and suddenly had a flash of inspiration. He stood up urgently and asked, "Director, didn't you just say that someone helped us for unknown purposes and slowed down the spread of the virus? What about that person? We need to find him." However, Fry did not utter the words Coulson most wanted from his mouth. After thinking for a moment, Fry slowly said, "We are very short-staffed now. Most of the Kun fighter jets are already on missions, but I still transferred a Kuan fighter jet to pick him up. You can rest assured. Upon hearing this, Coulson, who had received an answer, sat back in his chair and closed his eyes. He let out a deep sigh and suddenly felt a bit dazed. Surprisingly, the contribution made by the Divine Shield Bureau in saving the world is not as many as that of a bystander. However, it used to be the same before. When faced with a major crisis, several superheroes jumped out to prevent the end of the world, and the Divine Shield Bureau was responsible for tidying up the situation. Bai Ye's stable pistol aimed at the advancing zombie, and he focused his mind and pulled the trigger. A bullet flew through the air and headed straight for the zombie's skull. Time seemed to freeze for a moment, and then a muffled sound tore through the space. The bullet hit the zombie's skull with precision, like a sonic boom, causing the advancing evil to fall suddenly. The zombie's body lost its support and fell to the ground, lifting a cloud of dust. Its blood and brain plasma splattered everywhere, staining the surrounding ground red. At that moment, the howling of the zombies came to an abrupt end. Silence permeated the streets, accompanied by the crisp sound of shell casings falling. The other zombies seemed to be frightened by this sudden change and stopped moving forward. After the first zombie fell, Qian, who was carried on Bai Ye's shoulder, immediately shouted and reminded Bai Ye, "On your right." Bai Ye immediately turned his head to look in the direction to the right, and a few zombies rushed in front of him. Their faces were ferocious, and their eyes were full of malice. The zombies let out low growls, eager to approach White Knight, but he flexibly dodged their attacks while continuing to fire. His body is coordinated and orderly, with agile and swift steps, like a cheetah wandering and moving in a narrow space. The bullet hit a zombie's skull, causing its body to suddenly fall to the ground. Immediately after, a whip hit the chest of another zombie, causing it to lose its ability to continue moving forward, and another shot popped out of the chamber, causing the zombie to be completely silent. As the gunshots continued to sound, the number of zombies around gradually decreased, leaving only corpses lying on the ground. The last zombie fell to the ground, and the aftermath of the battle gradually dissipated, causing the streets to fall back into silence. The breathing of Bai Ye gradually stabilized, and a slight sweat dripped from his forehead onto the ground. I only walked a few kilometers and didn't expect to encounter so many zombies. Petro, who was carried on his shoulder, said solemnly, the situation seemed more serious than he had imagined. Bai Ye's shoulders collapsed and he threw the fast silver onto the ground. "Hey, what are you doing?" Quicksilver protested, feeling the pain. Bai Ye didn't answer, but walked up to silently observe the zombie corpses. Compared to the still confused Quicksilver, he saw something deeper. From their clothing, it can be seen that these zombies were not superpowers during their lifetime, but ordinary citizens with bite marks and scratches on their bodies. But none of them have a large scale loss of flesh and blood, which indicates that the person infected with them is not solely satisfying their appetite, but consciously spreading the virus. This is not good news. Bai Ye frowned. He thought those zombie heroes would eat for at least a few hours first to satisfy their appetite, but he didn't expect it to last even an hour. Someone was already trying to expand the scope of infection. How many superheroes in New York City are not zombies now? Thinking of this, he nervously scanned his surroundings, but fortunately there was no movement, and the corpses around him were still lying quietly on the ground. With a plan in mind, Bai Ye looked up and was about to leave when suddenly he froze. "Pietro, stop shouting for now. Is that person in red in front of you your sister?" End of this chapter. Chapter 10. True and False Wanda. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. True and False Wanda. Wanda. I'm here. Upon hearing Bai Ye's words, Petro was momentarily stunned and then shouted excitedly at the figure in front of him. The figure suspected of being a crimson which also seemed to hear the voice here, walking leisurely towards the White Knight. Accompanied by the gentle breeze, her red cloak fluttered gracefully, appearing so dazzling in the ruins. Bai Ye tilted his head, his eyes revealing a hint of doubt and vigilance, and a subtle unease arose in his heart. He tried hard to understand the feeling that something was not right, as if there was something wrong. His heart was filled with doubts, and his thoughts quickly turned. What makes him feel something is wrong? Is it the appearance of that figure? Or is her behavior not in line with the image of a witch? He tried to find the answer. What makes him feel something is wrong? He furrowed his brow slightly, recalling the comic plot he had seen before crossing over. Her posture, her gaze, her breath. Suddenly, a spiritual light flashed through Bai Ye's mind. His eyes widened and he suddenly realized. Originally, there was another character next to the Scarlet Witch in the plot. Why is she the only one now? Moreover, if it were a true Scarlet Witch, could she still be so leisurely when she saw her brother tied up? He quickly reacted and without hesitation pulled out his pistol, immediately aiming the muzzle at the Crimson Witch. At almost the same time, the figure suddenly moved and its speed increased astonishingly. At the same time, she let out a deep and terrifying roar, shaking the surrounding air. It doesn't matter if you're caught, it's okay if you have a gun. As long as it's meat, I'll still eat it. No. A familiar yet sharp female voice echoed in Petro's ears, causing his mood to plummet. Pain and sadness surged in his chest, his eyes turning red, and tears almost overflowing from his eyes. But Bai Ye frowned as he saw the gorgeous appearance of the figure gradually disappear, revealing her true face. Her face presented a sickly blue, with withered golden hair swaying in the wind. And as she ran, the surface of her skin continued to ripple blue, instantly transforming into a layer of rotten blue skin. It turned out to be a demon-shaped woman, and now everything is right. In the original plot, this guy became Wanda and infected with fast silver, causing the virus to spread globally at an unimaginable speed. However, she didn't remember for a moment and almost hit her path. Bai Ye's gaze was heavy as he aimed at the demonic woman and pulled the trigger. 2 bullets roared out, but unfortunately, the demonic woman only twisted her body and flexibly avoided this deadly attack. The bullet just grazed her body, cut through the air, and landed on the distant wall. He lowered his head and glanced at Quicksilver, who was still in pain with his eyes closed. He crouched down and reached out, then clenched his fist. Looking up, that's a demon-shaped woman pretending to be. Get out of here and I'll figure out how to deal with her. Ah. Not Wanda. With all his limbs bound, Petro opened his eyes and only then realized that the guy rushing towards him was a blue-skinned zombie. He dared not say anything and quickly twisted his body to roll towards the street. Bai Ye quickly adjusted the direction of the muzzle, raised the gun, and re-aimed at the enchanted woman. He calmly and decisively pulled the trigger, and the bullet shot out quickly again, breaking through the air and rushing towards the demonic woman. The demonic woman roared, her figure rapidly changing, trying to dodge this deadly attack. However, this time she was not so lucky. The bullet tracked the target like lightning and accurately hit the demonic woman. With a muffled sound, the bullet penetrated the body of the demonic woman, causing her blue skin to rupture and exposing decaying muscles and bones. The demonic woman let out a mournful scream, her transformation ability disrupted, and she could no longer disguise herself. Ah! This meat will still sting people. But the monster would never stop moving forward because of this small injury. The painful demonic woman instantly approached Bai Ye, opening her bloodthirsty mouth with fierce teeth flashing cold light, as if she was about to bite Bai Ye's throat in one bite. However, at the critical moment, Bai Ye took a deep breath and threw the handful of soil he had already grabbed in his hand without hesitation towards the demonic woman. The sand scattered and rained like raindrops on the face of the demonic woman. The soil adhered to her skin, spreading around her eyes and obscuring her vision. The demonic woman felt a blur in front of her. She tried to wipe the soil with her hands, but as she rubbed more and more, her vision became even more blurred. She let out a roar and wildly waved her arms, trying to get rid of the obstacle in front of her. Bai Ye seized this precious opportunity and quickly took a few steps back, aiming at the head of the demonic woman. Bang! With the sound of pulling the trigger, a muffled sound sliced through the air, and the bullet deeply penetrated the head of the demonic woman. She let out a mournful scream, her body shaky, but still struggled to stand, her paw carrying a terrifying force, roaring towards the White Knight. Not good. Bai Ye's eyes widened and he quickly flashed backwards, his claws narrowly brushing over his cheek, leaving a trace of blood on the strong wind. The chill instantly spread throughout the body, and the heart rate of Bai Ye accelerated, with cold sweat oozing from his forehead. Just a few centimeters away, he will turn into a monster that is no different from the one in front of him. No, it could be even worse because he is not a superpower. After being infected, he cannot even preserve his self-awareness and can only turn into a walking corpse. He couldn't help roaring. His mother. At the same time, he quickly retreated, the weapon in his hand kept spraying flames, and kept firing at the head of the devil-shaped woman. Although the demon-shaped woman is a third-level mutant, her skin can only withstand some small-caliber bullets. Although she can use her transformation ability to move the positions of some organs, her brain is something she cannot move. Roars and gunshots echoed through the streets, while Bai Ye retreated and fired wildly. The bullets poured down like a storm, tearing the head of the devil woman. The bullet mercilessly smashed her head, splattering blood and brain plasma, making her already ferocious face even more unrecognizable. In the end, the demonic female, who had lost her head, convulsed and collapsed to the ground, bouncing twice before becoming completely motionless. The anger of Bai Ye burned to the core, and his breathing was rapid and heavy, with sweat dripping from his forehead. Bai Ye took a breath and sweat dripped onto the ground. He looked at Quaishan, who had already rolled to the other end of the street, and smiled slightly. "Are you okay?" Quain asked in a daze. Bai Ye shook her head and said, "It's okay, I was just startled. Keep moving forward, we can't stop." At this moment, a buzzing noise suddenly came from a distance, and as the sound gradually approached, a series of noisy noises became clearer and clearer. Helicopter formations gradually appeared in the sky from afar, their rotors cutting through the air, emitting a buzzing sound that rushed towards them like a swarm of bees. "It's the National Guard," Bai Ye, who raised his head and squinted his eyes, said. "But they don't have much effect either, after all." Before he could finish speaking, a piercing red laser suddenly shot from a distance and accurately hit one of the helicopters. The helicopter instantly lost its balance under the action of the laser and began to spin and fall. Other helicopters were clearly disorganized under this sudden attack, flying in all directions like headless flies, and in the process, several were destroyed. With a shrug, Bai Ye walked over to pick up the fast silver, and he was powerless to do anything about it. End of this chapter.